You're listening to Shift, Human First Financial Guidance with Ross Marino.
Today, we are once again shifting the conversation with Danika Waddell. Hello, Danika.
Hey, Ross. How's it going?
It is good. It's always good to have you on the show and back on. We get to talk about life planning and so many other things. I know you're always busy, and this year, we're recording in 2023. You were doing the speaking tour. So I know you were out and on stage at many different places. How about you take the first minute and let people know who you are, what you do, and what's been going on this year?
Yeah, my name is Danika Waddell. As you said, I am the president and founder of Zena Financial Planning. We primarily work with women in the tech industry, not exclusively, but that's the majority of our client base. And I am a registered life planner, so I do a fair bit of life planning type work with my clients. A lot of my clients are really philanthropically inclined, charitably inclined, really interested in the impact of their decisions, their financial decisions. And so that just becomes a really big part of the conversations that we have. And so it's a really nice marriage with the life planning approach.
And you've spoken quite a few times this year, I guess. You've been out at some conferences?
I have been to a few conferences this year, yes, more so than ever before. And I think I hit my limit. I discovered what my upper limit was for the year, which was 6. That was too many. So
that's the number. Well, I'm glad Shift is on the list there. And it's neat to go out and speak. I get to do it as well. It's always a lot of fun, but you certainly hit that time period where you realize, okay, this is a lot of travel. This is intense, and I got to figure out how to balance it in there. So yeah, I've been there as well, but glad you're out there. You have a lot to share. And I know you get to speak a lot about life planning. It's certainly why I wanted to have you speaking at Shift, and certainly why I wanted to interview as well. Life planning is, to me at least, a fairly generic term because I'm not always sure what that means, but there are registered life planners. It is specific. It is a discipline. How about you, if you just start off with, this is what life planning is, and this is why you incorporate it into your practice?
Yeah, you're right. I don't think there is a single agreed upon definition. I think that the way that I consider it is really about taking, the person's financial life, all of the things that we look at in a traditional financial planning practice. So estate planning and taxes and all those things, but really integrating more of the values-based and qualitative work on the other side. So it's not just about maximizing the portfolio, but also making sure that the goals and values and all of that are really important to the client, that all of those things are aligned, and that they're sort of, the finances really support what is important to the client. So to me, it's, when we talk about comprehensive planning, again, most people are talking about retirement and education planning, but I think comprehensive planning includes just this much more holistic version of what a human being is, right? It includes things like someone's emotional health and physical health and spiritual well-being. Like all those really need to be considered when we are helping people with their finances. So it's really a much deeper understanding of how we help clients in a comprehensive way.
It's certainly one of the best ways to shift the conversation is to talk about what matters in life and shift the conversation to life planning. Now, George Kinder became famous with the 3 questions. I've heard it. I know they're out there. I actually know some people that say, oh, I just used those 3 questions, but I didn't take the program. And I have to kind of keep a straight face of, I'm pretty sure you need the program to really understand what the 3 questions are and the significance. How about you start off with explaining what are those 3 questions and maybe just your experience using them with clients?
Yeah, a lot of people use the 3 questions, and they're really powerful questions. I don't think that there's anything bad with using them without the training. I mean, I think the training certainly enhances that. But essentially, the 3 questions, number 1 is, you have all the money in the world, all the financial resources that you need. What are you going to do with your time? How do you spend your days? What does that open up for you? What becomes possible? The second question is, you do not have those unlimited resources, but just sort of your current financial situation, but you find out that you have something like 5 to 10 years left, right? So you feel great. You're not, restricted in terms of what you're able to do, but you just know that it's pretty finite. So knowing that you have 5 to 10 years left, what would you do differently? How does that shift? Is there any urgency around some of these goals that we would accelerate into the next 5 or 10 years or anything like that? And then question 3 is, you find out essentially you have 24 hours left to live. So, very sad news, you're going to die tomorrow. It's not about how you spend your last 24 hours, but what did you not get to do? Who did you not get to be? I actually really like that part of it. Is there anything that you had always just sort of put out in the future of like, yeah, I'll do that someday, that you never got around to, that you really regret? And so to your question about, what my experience has been with the 3 questions, I heard the 3 questions many times over the years of being in this industry, but I'd never gone through the process. I'd never answered them myself. And when I went through the registered life planner training, part of that process, you are life planned by, you get paired up with somebody. And so you basically life plan each other. And when I went through and actually answered the 3 questions myself, I mean, wow, I could not believe how powerful they were for me. And again, I'd heard them for years, but I never took the time to answer them. And I just had such a pretty profound experience going through that process. So, I mean, it became really obvious to me that this is something that is really valid and not valid, valuable to do with clients, because it can really unlock things that I think it's kind of hard to get at this sort of depth of a conversation with a client that you've just started working with. But these 3 questions are they're a pretty fast way to kind of get straight into the heart of the matter.
Yeah, it definitely is a way to help people dive deep. And obviously you have to give them space to answer the questions, because it's not something I think most people could just immediately answer off the cuff. They probably have to take time to process it and talk through it. And maybe the answers change as they're answering themselves. Now, I know when you go through those questions, the idea is to connect it to financial planning. That is the point. So how about if you talk a little bit about, say, the first few meetings after you have the 3 questions and how you integrate this or implement it into a financial plan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on kind of what comes out of those 3 questions. And when you're working with a couple, sometimes their answers are very different. More often than not, I find there's a lot of overlap when there's couples, but it really is sort of taking all of that information that you've gleaned from the 3 questions and any other discovery type of exercises that you might be doing with these clients, and then saying, okay, now what do we do with that? Right. So now we know that, spending time in the mountains is really important to you. How does that change your financial plan? Does that mean that maybe someday you're going to buy a second home in the mountains? Does that mean, you're going to change your career so that it's somehow integrated with that, hobby? Like, there's lots of different things that could mean. But I think that it's really up to the client and the planner together to explore what, how that's actually going to show up in their lives. So I think there's an ongoing conversation, certainly for those first couple of meetings after you've started this process, where you're really identifying, okay, specifically now, like, a lot of times I'll get people will say something like, it's really important to me to travel, to spend the time to travel and see my family that lives far away. Right. And so that just means we are, that's a pretty straightforward one where we can just build into their budget. You need a minimum of X thousand dollars a year to be able to fly home to see the people that you love. Right. So that's a really easy one, but a lot of times it's more complex, and it could take a long time for the client to really have a clear sense of how that's actually going to show up in their lives. So it's in many ways, because I know we're talking about sort of how to do this on an ongoing basis. For a lot of clients, it's not a quick transition. So this could take, multiple years where they're really still trying to evaluate. I have these answers to the 3 questions, and then I have kind of my professional life and my home and all my assets. And like, how do I kind of bring those things together? So it can be slow and it can be messy, which I think is fun.
I guess growth and progress is often slow and messy. So I guess that comes with it. Now, integrating it into the financial planning process certainly takes time, takes training, takes skill, and also I'd say repetitions, because I know there's many things that the first few times I've tried it, boy, it just feels clunky and awkward. Actually, like a podcast. I remember my first podcast. It was so bad. And I thought going into it was going to be so good. And then at the end, you watch the recording and think, have I ever seen a podcast? I mean, how did I actually come up with this stuff? But over time, you get to laugh and it gets a little smoother. Well, you, of course, bring clients in, you onboard them, you implement the plan. 2 years goes by, 3, 4, maybe 5 years goes by. Life happens, plans change, people get disrupted, families change. Might be time to revisit some of those life planning questions. Do you have a process or maybe a trigger when you say, let's bring these questions back, let's revisit them?
At this point, I haven't reintroduced or gone through the 3 questions with a client a second time. I've never sort of said, why didn't you answer these questions again? But one thing I do, at the beginning of like an annual review meeting or an annual renewal meeting is just to say to a client, what's shifted for you? What's changed since the last time we met? And something just as simple as that can really open the door to, it's not just, how was your family vacation that you just went on, and how are the kids doing in school, and sort of the usual small talk that we have, but what's new, what's different from the last time that we talked. I also think there's this inclination, I think, as planners, we go to a meeting with an agenda and we kind of show up and we're ready to kind of run through our checklist, and to allow the client the space to dictate what they want to talk about. Right. And that can be really hard as planners, like, but I have all this stuff, I have all these charts ready to go. But to say to a client, hey, I have a number of things prepared for today, but I want to make sure that we cover what's most important to you. What's on your mind? What do you want to make sure that we talk about today? And not pushing that to the end, because if a client has something on their mind and they have to listen to you, prattle on for 45 minutes about performance or something, they're not paying any attention, right? They're really not. So putting that at the front and center of every meeting, what's important to you today? What do you need out of this meeting? Or what would be most helpful for us to discuss today? And if you never get to your agenda, you never get to your agenda. But I think that's a hard thing for a lot of planners to say, like, but I have all this great stuff that I want to get through. The client doesn't care. 9 times out of 10, they really don't care about, your charts and your investment performance or whatever it is, but really allowing them to set the tone and say, this is what's most important to me today. So I think just some really simple ways to show up and let the client know that they're the most important thing. It's not what you prepared, it's what's on their mind.
Shifting the conversation to make sure we're asking more questions instead of just providing answers and information and data and so forth. I just was studying over the weekend and actually was redoing one of my processes for onboarding clients. And I have one meeting that I just want to call the top of mind meeting, where I don't want to have the agenda. I just have to know what's top of mind for you. Because when I've asked that question in the past, it's taken up the entire meeting if I actually do it. And I don't need my agenda, but I have great charts and everything, but I'll let them go because they don't actually care. And to be able to shift the conversation and focus on that, we know it's beneficial. We've seen it, we've experienced it, but I think for advisors, and it's just part of our wiring, maybe, it's just hard to do sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then one other comment I have about that is, at the top of the work that we do with our clients, we have their statement of purpose and we have their core values. I mean, it is literally front and center underneath their name on everything that we do together. And so when something comes up and a client is, trying to decide about, taking a new job or moving or something like that, we'll bring that up and say, here's your core values, here's your statement of purpose. Which of these 2 decisions that you're trying to, you're trying to make a decision between 2 things, like, which of these is in line with what you've told us as your statement of purpose? Or maybe the statement of purpose has shifted, but it's a really helpful lens to sort of have those conversations when something comes up and sort of bring up those, or maybe even bring up the answers to the 3 questions and say, hey, just want to remind you that these are the things you said are really important to you. How does that influence your decision? And a lot of times when we do that, the client just immediately goes, oh, of course. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Of course, this is the obvious choice. So it's just a really helpful framework as clients are, to sort of bring them back to that.
Look forward to hearing you speak at Shift. It's always a pleasure to interview you, listen to you. I appreciate the work you're doing, and you just have a great way of explaining how to integrate life planning. I know it's going to be a great session. Danika, thanks for being on the show. We'll see you in March at Shift.
Thanks, Ross.
Thank you for listening to Shift with Ross Marino. Please visit humanfirst.live to learn more. This show is for general information purposes only and is not intended to provide recommendations or advice. Speak with a legal, tax, or financial advisor before making any decisions. Past performance references are historical and do not guarantee future results.